They came without warning, but not in the way we feared. No thunderous skies, splitting warships, no weapons bristling with intent, just a single vessel, sleek, white, impossibly smooth, sending over Geneva like a feather floating through a storm. It didn't shatter the clouds or demand attention. It simply was there, hovering in silence above the United Nations headquarters, as if it had always belonged. The world held its breath. We expected ultimatums, proclamations, or cold scans of our nuclear infrastructure. But what emerged was not war, not conquest, not even caution. What emerged was a being so elegant, so impossibly alien yet soft in demeanor, that the global networks went silent in awe. A being we would come to call Serari. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, with translucent skin that shimmered like starlight, limbs that moved like flowing water, and eyes, if they could be called, that pulsed gently in hues of violet and gold. It did not speak with sound. Its voice was a rhythm of harmonics that resonated in the bones. Yet somehow the message was clear. We come for peace. We come to help. Let us share what we have learned. In an instant, everything changed. The Serari offered knowledge, not demands. They offered technology that made our finest minds weep in both joy and inferiority. Clean energy that needed no fuel. Medical scanners that could detect cancer cells before they formed. Seeds that grew crops in barren wastelands. They presented these gifts without terms, without leverage, without expectation. Skepticism ruled the early days. After all, no species gives without taking. The Serari must want something. Resources, genetic material, perhaps a slow conquest by infiltration. Yet months passed, then years, no demands, no occupation. Just guidance, consultation, and slow, careful integration. They refused control. They encouraged independence, and it worked. Climate change began to reverse. Diseases once fatal became mere annoyances. Famine was nearly wiped out in entire regions. For the first time in history, humans from opposite ends of the globe collaborated not out of fear, but in wonder. The Serari were the catalyst, not rulers, not saviors, just catalysts. They visited cities, helped rebuild war-torn regions, and taught languages we never knew could exist. Children learned from them, elders healed because of them, and still they asked for nothing. Their presence was a song of hope in a world used to screams. Some worshipped them, others distrusted them deeply. Conspiracy theorists screamed about hidden motives and DNA theft, but even those skeptics found themselves healed by Serari medical tech when cancer struck. It became hard to hate what made your child's legs walk again. They were perfect, and that, perhaps, was the problem. Perfection is unsettling to a species like ours. We are animals tempered by fire, built on conflict, hardened through betrayal and bloodshed. The Serari had no armies, no security forces, not even personal shields. They believed their commitment to peace was a sufficient defense. It made no sense to us, and deep down it made us afraid. Because what does it mean when another species, older, wiser, and clearly more advanced, offers you everything you ever needed, without asking for a single thing in return? To us, it meant they were lying. No one believed they were truly so pure, not the military leaders watching from behind mirrored glass, not the politicians who measured risk in re-election cycles, not the intelligence agencies quietly dissecting every Serari broadcast, and certainly not the man who would eventually give the order. It was inevitable in hindsight. When a lion is offered a leash made of silk, it still sees a leash, and the human race, even at its most grateful, will always be a lion. It started small, a missed translation, a pause too long during a diplomatic meeting, a hand gesture that, to the Serari, meant goodwill, yet to a human bodyguard watching nearby, looked like an aggressive signal. Tensions that had been buried beneath a layer of interstellar awe began to surface. It wasn't the people, not at first. Ordinary humans were enamored with the Surari. Children ran up to them without fear. Civilians flooded social media with glowing reviews of Surari healing pods, fusion batteries, and sky glass that never cracked. But behind the public admiration, military leaders and intelligence communities were having very different conversations. "They're mapping our infrastructure," one NATO official warned. "They're replacing our dependency on fossil fuel with tech only they understand," said another. "They can shut it all down with a signal, and we'd be powerless." There was no proof. Only instincts, human instincts. The final spark came from an accident, or so we believed, during a Surari diplomatic gathering in Washington, D.C. One of the emissaries broke off from the main group. They were known for their wandering curiosity, often drifting from place to place, touching buildings, plants, even humans, as if trying to feel our world through empathy alone. But this one wandered too far. A Secret Service agent, already on edge from the alien's nonverbal behavior, stepped into its path. The Surari raised a glowing appendage, perhaps to offer a friendly link, perhaps to study his neural state. But to a soldier trained to identify threats, it looked like the beginning of an attack. The shot rang out across the marble steps of the Capitol. A single bullet, center mass. The Surari emissary collapsed in silence. No scream, no blood, just the flickering of light from within their body, fading like a dying star. Panic erupted. The remaining Surari were escorted away by their own kind in near silence. The White House issued an emergency apology. Investigations began immediately. The soldier was placed on leave, but the damage had been done. The message had been written in flesh. Humanity still believed in fear. The Surari did not retaliate. That was the most unsettling part. There were no threats, no demands for justice, no weapons raised, just a single statement transmitted across every global communication channel in one unified pulse of sound and light. "We have misjudged the depth of your wounds." They began withdrawing shortly afterward. Their cities, floating hubs in our skies, closed their access points. Their guidance systems for food, power, and medicine continued functioning, but the mentors themselves disappeared from sight. Earth's people wept. They didn't understand why the Surari were leaving, but the governments did. Behind closed doors, contingency plans activated, satellites retasked, orbital cannons powered up. For years, the militaries of Earth had been quietly studying the Surari tech they were gifted. Reverse engineering, weaponizing, preparing. Because deep down, they never believed the peace would last. Deep down, they always assumed war was coming. And now, with the Surari pulling away, it looked like that war was closer than ever. An intercepted transmission, scrambled, but clear enough to fuel Paran, Oyasa, jested a Surari fleet was approaching the solar system. Likely a convoy, a rescue mission, maybe even a gesture of renewal. But to human generals, it looked like a prelude to invasion. They couldn't take the chance, not after the D.C. incident, not after centuries of war embedded in human instinct. So a vote was held, unannounced to the public. A unanimous decision. The first strike doctrine was activated. The Surari had come for peace, but we didn't trust it. We mistook their silence for planning. We mistook their patience for plotting. And so, in one terrible, irreversible decision, we fired first. The Surari never anticipated what came next. They had studied our species from afar for generations before initiating contact, an effort of immense restraint by their standards. To them, we were still primitive, emotionally volatile, and dangerously creative. But they had also seen our beauty, our art, our endurance, our passion for connection. They believed, or at least hoped, that peace was possible. But after the incident in Washington and the slow, uneasy retreat of their emissaries, that hope dwindled. They hadn't counted on our paranoia. They hadn't factored in just how deeply our species feared the unknown. And then we struck. Earth's militaries launched what would later be known as Operation Blind Sky. Within 6 hours, all visible Surari orbital vessels were targeted, hypersonic rail, cannons hidden in the Arctic, space torpedoes launched from stealth satellites, an experimental EMP net that blacked out every skyglass dome the Surari had ever gifted to us. The Earth lit up not with celebration, but with coordinated firepower that even the most advanced alien minds hadn't expected from a so-called pre-FDL species. To the Surari, it was betrayal. A betrayal so sharp, it stunned even their war-born ancestors, beings who had long ago moved past violence. They never saw it coming because in their culture, such acts were considered extinct. They had assumed that any being capable of compassion was incapable of such cold, calculated destruction. But humanity was different. We had built art from pain, cities from ruin. We turned our fear into fuel and our trauma into tactics. And now, for the first time in centuries, the Surari would have to remember what it meant to fight for survival. Their first move was a defense maneuver. They reactivated dormant shielding arrays across the inner rim of Earth's orbit. 3 of their vessels escaped destruction, sparking with plasma scars, retreating into deep space to regroup. One plummeted into the Pacific, never recovered. Another managed to power down and cloak itself somewhere in the upper stratosphere, leaking energy like blood. And the third, it remained in low orbit. A silent watcher, a wounded sentinel, Earth's leaders called it the Eye. Humanity stood still, breathless, waiting for the counterattack, but it never came, not in the way they expected. Instead, the Surari issued a single, haunting message: "You are not what we hoped, but you are not yet lost." Then, silence, no more transmissions, no more emissaries, no retaliation, just the chilling, unresolved quiet of a galaxy that now watched us not as infants, but as something else entirely. In the days that followed, the truth began to sink in. We weren't the children of the stars anymore. We weren't the species being nurtured or mentored. By acting first, by drawing blood on those who offered peace, we had crossed an invisible line. We had joined the adults' table of the cosmos, but at what cost? Diplomats tried to reopen channels. Science coalitions formed to track the Surari fleet. Religious leaders offered prayers for forgiveness, while conspiracy theorists claimed the entire event had been orchestrated by a breakaway cabal within Earth's defense forces. Meanwhile, something began to shift in space. Quiet movements near Jupiter's orbit, flickers of light beyond Saturn, Surari technology or something new, perhaps older, perhaps not Surari at all. Because while humanity had shocked the galaxy with our aggression, we'd also sent out a new signal. We were no longer observers, we were players. And in that terrifying silence after the first strike, the rest of the galaxy was forced to ask, if this is what humanity does in its infancy, what will it become when it grows? The retaliations began not with weapons, but with whispers. At first, it was the smaller trade stations, those that straddled the lawless fringes of neutral space. Human freighters began reporting strange delays, unscheduled inspections, and even total denial of docking rights. Galnet, the interstellar communication network, slowly filled with stories of humans being turned away from establishments where they'd once been welcomed. Then came the price hikes, the refusal to sell fuel, food, or rare alloys. Entire shipping lanes quietly rerouted to avoid Terran vessels. We had become toxic, but that wasn't the part that stung the most. What hurt more was that some of the very species we had helped, those whose sick we had healed, whose stations we had protected from pirates, whose languages we had translated into thousands of human dialects, were suddenly afraid of us. Not cautious, not skeptical, afraid. One human diplomat, Ambassador Lindra Mayers, found herself stranded at the Quarus Enclave for 2 weeks, held in a locked suite with round the clock surveillance. She was offered luxurious accommodations, but not a single being would speak to her. Not even the AI steward. Her crime. She'd been aboard one of the ships that coordinated Earth's emergency withdrawal from the Surari Peace Summit, an action now interpreted by many as a smokescreen for Earth's premeditated military strike. Our representatives on galactic councils were quietly stripped of voting rights, security restructuring, they called it. Earth's seat at the PANS species trade table was declared under review. Our scientists were denied access to joint labs on Galactic Prime. Our engineers were removed from oversight of the Titan Accords fusion grid. One by one, the doors began to close, and still we stood tall, publicly at least. The Earth Union released bold statements. We acted in defense of our sovereignty. We will not apologize for protecting our people. Humanity will not be bullied into silence. But behind closed doors there was panic, real fear. We had not been prepared for this level of isolation. Some of our own began to question the decisions. Protests erupted in major Terran cities. We want unity, not war. Read one banner in Sao Paulo. Bring back the stars. Said another in Nairobi. News outlets leaked internal communications, showing just how uncoordinated humanity's first act of interstellar aggression had been. Some believed it was a defense contractor's manipulation. Others blamed a rogue military faction. A few whispered about AI black ops gone sentient, and all the while the galaxy watched. Then came the first real retaliation. Not economic, not diplomatic, but violent. A Terran cargo ship, the Yukon Reach, was ambushed near the proxy line by an unknown assailant. Its hull was shredded by precision plasma lances. The crew of 12 was never found. Black box footage showed a sleek, reflective vessel with no known registration, operating with stealth tech far more advanced than anything the Surari had shared. That ship vanished into deep space, and with it, the last illusion that Earth's war was over. Retaliation had come, not in the form of a grand battle fleet, but as a scalpel in the dark. Someone, or something, had taken it upon themselves to show humanity that our place in the galaxy was not secure, that for every act of force there would be consequences, not official, not declared, but deadly. Earth's military doubled its patrols. AI watchdogs monitored space for unmarked vessels. New alliances were proposed with fringe species that still dealt with us, desperate to cobble together relevance again. But the damage had been done. Humanity's name was now spoken in the same breath as volatile, untrustworthy, dangerous. We had gone from curiosity to threat, from potential ally to existential question, and as retaliations continued, some subtle, some catastrophic, one truth became painfully clear. In seeking to prove our strength, we had set fire to the fragile web of peace the galaxy had built. Now we would either learn to rebuild it or burn with it. Earth stood at a crossroads. The galaxy had turned cold. Alliances had crumbled, and our name, once a curious whisper of potential, was now a warning. But in the darkest hour, something ancient and deeply human stirred, not in boardrooms or war councils, but in the hearts of people who refused to surrender to isolation. It began not with a government initiative, but with civilians. Scientists, engineers, artists, and philosophers who believed that humanity had more to offer than warships and defiance. Groups formed under 1,000 names: the Bridge Project, the Starbound Accord, Unity Beyond Earth. Their mission was simple yet profound: to remind the galaxy what it had admired about us in the first place: our creativity, our adaptability, our maddening refusal to die, yes, but also our ability to dream beyond the boundaries of fear. Dr. Elon Marcus, a xenolinguist who had once served as a translator during the early First Contact missions, took it upon himself to reopen communications with the Veral, one of the first species to cut ties after Earth's military actions. He did not go with a government envoy or military escort. He went alone on a repurposed survey ship, with nothing but archived messages and old recordings of shared laughter between humans and Veral diplomats. When he finally arrived in Veral space, he was detained, of course, but instead of resisting, he simply asked for a conversation. They gave him 10 minutes. He stayed for 3 months, one spark. Elsewhere, young human artists began to flood GalNet with messages of peace through music, holographic murals, and VR experiences drawn from Earth's deepest myths and brightest hopes. An orchestra performed Beethoven's Ninth Symphony live from lunar orbit, streaming it in a format compatible with over 900 species audiovisual standards. The reaction was unexpected. Some species couldn't process the emotional complexity of the piece and reported being overwhelmed. But others, particularly those with a shared appreciation of aesthetics, began to listen, to feel another spark. Then came the Mars Accord, not a treaty between governments, but a collaboration among independent scientists, human and alien, who secretly maintained ties despite the political fallout. Together, they created a portable atmospheric stabilizer based on shared Terran and Sorgath technologies. It was deployed on 3 colony worlds suffering from ecological collapse. None of the planets belonged to Earth. That didn't matter. More sparks, and slowly, some species began to re-engage, quietly, carefully. The trade embargoes weren't lifted, but they softened. Patrol ships no longer fired warning shots at Terran vessels unless provoked. A few alien universities quietly began accepting human students again. Under strict quotas, yes, but it was something. Some began referring to it as the Quiet Restoration. Humanity's response to the retaliation hadn't been more retaliation. It had been redefinition. Yes, our governments built new warships. Yes, the military stayed on alert. But in the shadows of conflict, Earth's people reminded the stars why we had ever been welcome to begin with. We were flawed, yes, prone to passion and rage and tribalism, but we also had something rare, a relentless drive to belong, not just to survive, but to matter, to connect. And when the galaxy tried to shut us out, we didn't go silent. We sang louder. A single human didn't change everything. 1,000,000 humans didn't either. But one by one, 10 by 10, voices rose in harmony, not as a chorus of power, but as a plea for understanding. We didn't need to conquer the stars. We just needed to remind them we were still worth believing in. Years passed, the stars turned, wars ended, and empires fell, as they always do. But the scars of what humanity had done, and what had been done to humanity, remained burned into the galactic memory. The Council of Species had long kept records of every race that had threatened galactic peace, but Earth's entry into those records was unique. Not because we had devastated planets or rewritten treaties in fire, but because of what came after. We didn't fade into history, we became the standard. The galaxy had once seen us as unpredictable, dangerous, maybe even unstable, and they weren't wrong. We had pushed the limits of morality, weaponized science with terrifying efficiency, and proven beyond a doubt that we could be the monsters they feared. But then, we didn't collapse. We didn't disappear under the weight of our own violence. We evolved. Humanity began to take its place not as the wild card species, but as the Reckoner. The Reckoner, that's what they started calling us. Not conqueror, not savior. The race that remembered, the race that never forgot. We carried the history of every species we encountered, not just in databases, but in culture, in art, in the way we spoke, built, and dreamed. While other civilizations were content to file away the past in crystal archives and sealed vaults, humanity lived the past. We made museums out of warships, turned battlefield coordinates into coordinates of memorial parks, and raised statues not only to our heroes, but to the aliens who died fighting us, or alongside us. And this act of remembrance was terrifying in its own way, because it meant we learned. It meant we wouldn't make the same mistake twice. We didn't stop building weapons. We made better ones, but we no longer built them to conquer. We built them as deterrents, tools of last resort, yes, but tools we were terrifyingly efficient at creating. But the galaxy noticed something stranger. We weren't the first to strike anymore. We weren't eager for war. When border skirmishes erupted, we responded with diplomacy first, force only if absolutely necessary. Our soldiers were trained not just in combat, but in xenoethics, diplomacy, and planetary psychology. Even stranger, humans began to serve in other species' militaries, as advisors, as strategists, as peacekeepers, and it was during one of those deployments on the fractured moon of Keshorlan that something truly remarkable happened. A young Terran lieutenant, Sarah Mbeki, stood between two alien factions, both armed, both screaming, both ready to slaughter each other over a mining claim. She didn't shout, she didn't pull a weapon. She told them a story, not about Earth, but about the Karathi reconciliation, a moment from their own history that they had forgotten, buried under centuries of tribal revenge. She told it in their language. She even used their ancient symbols to sketch the tale into the dusty soil beneath their boots. And the fighting stopped, not forever, but long enough to negotiate. Word of that spread across 1,000 systems. Humanity wasn't just the race that survived war. We had become the race that understood it, that could see the ghosts in someone else's story, and that made us powerful in a way no one had anticipated, not because we were stronger or faster or more technologically advanced, but because we felt deeper, because we remembered, because we were willing to carry the weight of memory and turn it into something that could shape the future. In the end, we didn't just return to the galactic stage. We rebuilt it, with scarred hands, with weary hearts, with defiant hope, because that's what humans do. We burn, we break, we bleed, and then we build something better.